Yesterday, Sayadaw spoke about the benefits that occur in relationship with keeping the training of sila from both a theoretical and a practical standpoint. What the Buddha explained about this is quite satisfying. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha spoke about 5 kinds of Vaira and 5 kinds of Bhaya. That means 5 kinds of enemies and 5 dangers. And these 5 enemies are none other than not keeping the 5 precepts. That is, the acts of killing, stealing, committing sexual misconduct, lying, and indulging in drugs and intoxicants. For those who break the 5 precepts, enemies are always surrounding one, and there is always danger. And Sayadaw would like to speak today about this in the context of what is happening in the world today. These enemies that Sayadaw spoke about are called akusala vera, the enemies in the form of akusala. And because this akusala occurs together with lobha, dosa, and moha, and other kilesas, greed, hatred, and delusion, and so on, these enemies are also called kilesa vera, the kilesa enemy. Besides this akusala vera or kilesa vera, there is also described pugala vera, the enemy in the form of a person, personal enemy. And pugala vera, or personal enemy, could be a human, could be other types of beings, animals that cause us trouble, and could also be unseen beings. So among these 2 kinds of enemy, the internal enemy of the akusalas, kilesas, is the enemy that we always have to face in our life. This is always with us in our existence. Enemies in the form of other people or other beings, these are outside of us, and these are far away, and we don't encounter them very often in life. When you compare close enemies, enemies that are near, and enemies that are distant, the near enemies are the ones that are worse. Because if you see an enemy from far away, you can avoid it. So the internal enemies don't help us at all. They harm us. And as far as gross and medium kilesas, these are always assaulting us, except for the time when we're asleep. From the moment that we wake up, every time there's contact with a sense object, every time there's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, there's greed and anger arising. And every time there's contact, there's kilesas arising if we have no way to control ourselves. So if we have no way of controlling our physical, verbal, and mental behavior, then our enemies multiply constantly. So just think about this in terms of your own life. These kilesas are constantly threatening us, constantly arising. And people don't know of a way to control. Basically, most people don't have any way to overcome the internal enemy and control their physical, verbal, and mental behavior. and thus they spend their time indulging in kilesas, and this brings about problems. And these problems cause sorrow. And sorrow is how most people end their lives. Some people just take the attitude that, well, if there's something that is a cause for greed to arise, that'll happen. If there's something to get angry about, then anger is natural. And how could one possibly know all these things? So people just think, oh well, these problems happen. Anger, greed, ignorance, this just happens. And so people like this don't have any need. They don't see any need to avoid transgressions or to control one's mind or to uproot these tendencies. What concerns most people is physical problems, physical disease. So, but of course everyone has disease. This is just the way things are. But if you take disease such as malaria, look at how much work is done to prevent it, to overcome it, to eradicate it. And other diseases, it's the same way. When there's some type of disease in the world, people search for a way to cure it. And they spend a lot of time doing this. But when it comes to mental afflictions like greed, anger, delusion, lobha, dosa, and moha, people don't search for a way to avoid these. People don't search for a way to control themselves so those don't occur, or to uproot these tendencies. And as a result, these tendencies just boil inside people's minds. And when they overflow and people take action based on extreme greed, extreme anger, extreme delusion, then problems arise. And there are many problems in the world because of this now. So a conclusion that one can draw is that people don't see the faults of greed, hatred, and delusion, of lobha, dosa, and moha. They don't know that this internal enemy is the worst one that we can face. Because if we let these enemies exist inside us, if we let them rise in our mind, then when they get to an extreme, we turn to immoral actions. So, turning to immoral actions, when people don't have any consideration for others, they don't have any loving kindness or wish to help. So, when there is a true wish for other people to be well and happy, and a wish for people not to suffer, with the feeling of metta for others, wanting them to be happy, when other people are happy, are experiencing good conditions, it's easy for mudita, sympathetic joy, to arise too. And these qualities, metta, karuna, and mudita, are virtually absent in the world today. A conclusion that one can draw is that the ability to reflect about what type of action is beneficial and what isn't, what type of action is suitable and what isn't, is very much absent or lacking in the world today. If one can reflect on what is beneficial and what isn't, what is suitable and what isn't, then one won't turn to acts of killing, stealing, and adultery. But because people are not able to reflect in this way, people don't see the fault in actions such as these. Instead, people think that these actions are good. And not seeing the fault in misdeeds such as killing, stealing, committing adultery, they don't see the danger involved in performing these acts. And so they're not afraid to do these things. They have no shame to perform misdeeds and no fear. These powers of mind, the power of moral shame and moral fear, are absent. So lacking knowledge about what is beneficial and not, suitable and not, lacking a sense of shame and fear regarding misdeeds, lacking consideration for others, people just delight in misdeeds. The same way that beings who like feces are very happy to eat them. People who don't see the danger in misdeeds are very happy doing these misdeeds. So this is what is happening in the world today. People who do physical and verbal misdeeds and don't have basic morals don't see the fault of being this way. They don't have any shame regarding misdeeds or fear. These qualities, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, are called Hiri and Ottappa. These two are called Dhamma. That means that they're black dhammas. And an analogy for this quality of these dhammas are that the color black is something that soaks up heat rather than repels it. If you compare it with cloth that's white colored, for example, cloth that is black soaks up the heat. And these dhammas are like that with regard to kilesas. It's as though they absorb the kilesas. Hiri and Ottappa, the qualities of moral shame and moral Dhamma, are called Sukha Dhamma. They make one clean and pure. So in the heat, if we wear white clothing, this repels the heat. So the qualities of these two dhammas are expressed in this way. Just like these two colors of white and black, materials made out of white and materials made out of black tend to either repel or absorb heat, so too the quality of Hiri and Ottappa, these black dhammas of Hiri and Ottappa, tend to make their kilesas themselves, and they don't repel the kilesas, they encourage them. And if we have a lot of Hiri and Ottappa, then we'll have more kilesas. But if, on the other hand, moral shame and moral fear are prevalent, if we have those qualities a lot, then the heat of the kilesas will be repelled and we will feel relief. So Hiri and Ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, are very important for people. And it's not that they are absent from the world, but it's as if they are. The Buddha said that lobha or greed is like a fire. He talked about fires, agi, and raga, lobha, is one. This is grasping on to good things, grasping on to life. and only being satisfied if one gets what one wants. This is the fire of raga, ragagi. When we meet with something good, then we smile, we feel happy. But when we meet up with something that we don't like, then we feel anger. And we think that these things, the things that we don't like, are harmful for us. So then we feel hatred, dosa. And based on this, we act. So if these fires of greed, these fires of lobha and dosa, if we don't see their faults, but act upon them, if we think that just letting these fires burn is good, this is the fire of delusion, mohagi. And for most people in the world, for most beings in the world, these fires of raga, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion, are burning. And there's no cool peace. Those with no ability to weigh their actions as to whether they are beneficial or not beneficial, as to whether they are suitable or unsuitable, are not afraid of these fires. They don't know any moral shame or moral fear, and so they're happy with indulging in these fires, just like moths circling around a flame. They come to their end that way. So with lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, these dhammas that are like the color black, if these are our basis, if these are at the base, then they will create a lot of heat in our lives. So how can we possibly be comfortable with this type of heat? Those who have the knowledge, the ability to weigh whether their actions are beneficial or not, whether they are suitable or unsuitable, people like this are afraid of the fires, and they're also ashamed to do misdeeds. So when we have moral shame and moral fear, if these qualities become strong, they will protect one. They will keep one from doing or speaking or even planning wrong actions. So as a result, these misdeeds don't stick to one. Therefore, these two qualities of Hiri and Ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, are said to repel the heat of misdeeds. If these two, Hiri and Ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, are not present, then we can't possibly protect our own individual world, much less the world around us. But to the extent that we have moral shame and fear, we will be able to protect our lives from the fires of raga, greed, the fire of dosa, anger, the fire of moha, delusion. And in doing this, in protecting our own little world, we can also help to protect the world at large. Therefore, these two dhammas, Hiri and Ottappa, are called Lokapala Dhamma. They are the guardian dhammas of the world. So one who one who is able to guard one's own world can live peacefully, and one can measure for oneself. One can look at oneself and see whether greed is on the uprise or decreasing, whether anger is on the uprise or decreasing. So one can monitor oneself when one has the ability to protect one's world. But in the world, most people don't have any way to measure the heat of raga, the heat of dosa, the heat of moha in themselves. Some scientists, many people in fact, feel that they look at the condition of global warming and see that because the environment is becoming warmer, the polar caps are melting, and this is a danger. There are many dangers involved in global warming. But this heat is not so important. What is important is to be able to measure the heat within oneself, the heat of raga, dosa, and moha, and to be able to control it, reduce it, eliminate it. One who has Hiri and Ottappa, moral shame and moral dread, avoids doing physical, verbal misdeeds bravely. And in doing so, one's own world becomes peaceful. When one's own world is peaceful, then the environment too becomes peaceful. And this is a way to bring about world peace. If the people of the world, each one in their own way, brings peace to their own small world, here and there, it will bring about more peace. So the polar caps, the ice caps melting on the poles is not something to be afraid of. It's the tendencies inside of us, the immoral tendencies inside of us that are to be feared. So these Dhammas of Hiri and Ottappa, they protect the world. And if people have these qualities of Hiri and Ottappa, they also become bright. And so these Dhammas are called Deva Dhamma, the bright Dhammas, the Dhammas that make the world shine. Because when we, out of moral shame and moral fear, when we avoid doing misdeeds, physical and verbal misdeeds, then our actions and our speech become clean and pure and lovable. We don't commit any transgressions, so our actions are peaceful, our lives are peaceful. If we then also do satipatthana practice, knowledge arises and our lives become even more bright. By observing sila, by developing samadhi, by developing knowledge through satipatthana, one's physical, verbal, and mental behaviors are clean, and the gross defilements, the transgressive ones, the medium level ones, the obsessive ones, and the refined ones, these are all reduced and eliminated through the practice. So beings who undertake to do this through developing the practice of satipatthana, developing knowledge, among humans these are the best, and among the devas also these are of the best. This path of satipatthana, which starts out from having the qualities of moral shame and moral fear, is a path that can take us all the way to the realization of arahantship. And this is An arahant is completely pure. So an arahant is called Visuddhi Deva. So there are three different types of devas that Sayadaw mentioned. One is Samuti Deva, and these are beings like rulers of a country or rulers of a world. And the second category is Upapati Deva. These are the celestial beings that live in the Deva realms. And the third type of Deva is Visuddhi Deva, one who, through developing Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, becomes an Arahant and gains true peace. So the Buddha said that these qualities of Hiri and Ottappa protect the world. Moral shame and moral fear protect the world. And thus they're called Lokapala Dhammas. And they also make the world bright. So they're called Deva Dhammas. If one compares how it is before keeping 5 precepts with undertaking the path of Sila, keeping the 5 precepts, look at what the difference is. So having the Dhammas that protect the world, having Hiri and Ottappa makes a person bright, and it makes their qualities shine. So one has dignity. These qualities of Hiri and Ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, they pull out the heat of the fires of raga, dosa and moha, greed, hatred and delusion. And they protect our world. They make our world cool and peaceful. So this is basic human culture, to have this type of peace. The gross problems of the world, the violence that occurs in the world, would die down with these qualities developing in people. When one has the qualities of Hiri and Ottappa bring about consideration for others. One refrains from doing wrong because of shame and fear regarding the results. So one gains consideration for others through this. So these are the powers that Hiri and Ottappa have. If one gradually eliminates physical, verbal, and mental misdeeds, bit by bit, one's qualities become brighter and brighter. And if one reaches the stage of realizing Sotapannahood, if one realizes the first stage of enlightenment, the 5 precepts, one will keep the 5 precepts without breaking them. So at that point, the fires of raga, dosa, and moha won't arise to the extent that they can bring us down to a lower rebirth. So through this we conquer the internal enemy through our practice, eliminating the physical, verbal, and mental misdeeds. We conquer the internal enemy, and doing this, our environment is improved. So when we can keep the 5 precepts firmly, then we won't have any danger of self-blame, atanuvada, because we won't commit transgressions. And thus also we won't be blamed by others. There won't be this danger of paranuvada, danger of other blames from others. And there won't be any breaking of the law. So we won't be in fear of prosecution or legal punishment. And if we gain first path and fruition, then we won't ever go down to a lower realm in a future lifetime. So this shows the essence of the Dhamma. This is the substance of the Dhamma. And today, this is all for today. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.